Today's guest is someone that I've respected and admired for a very long time. Chad Hennings believes that in order to achieve a legacy of excellence, one must live a life of integrity and purpose. In his words, excellence isn't a destination, it's an identity. Chad Hennings has lived this message through a 9-year NFL career and 3 Super Bowl championships with my beloved Dallas Cowboys, 45 combat missions as a U.S. Air Force pilot flying an A10 Warthog in the Persian Gulf, and as an accomplished businessman in commercial real estate. Chad has taken this message around the world, sharing it with distinguished audiences ranging from Fortune 500 companies to a host of government agencies and respected nonprofits. He's also a philanthropic leader in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, serving on several nonprofits that work with at-risk families and veterans. Chad is the founder of Wingmen Ministries, an organization that encourages discipleship and mentorship of men. Chad Hennings, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Hey, good to be on with you.
Thank you, Chad. And first of all, thank you for your service to our country. And a little bit of a lower level, but not so much. Thanks so much for your 3 Super Bowl championships.
My honor, my pleasure.
So you're from Elberon, Iowa, which I'm told is between Keystone and Vining, and just down the road from Dysart. Those don't sound like very big places. Tell us about how you grew up, with your family, and Elberon, how it shaped you and influenced who you are.
Yeah. Population of Elberon is probably about 150 people. It's more like a village than a town, but that's probably typical of most smaller towns in the state of Iowa, all predominantly farming community towns. But I grew up on a farm. At the time, it was about a 950-acre farm. We raised corn to support a feedlot operation for cattle. And I grew up on a family farm that is, it's been in our family for 150 plus years. My family settled that part of eastern Iowa, starting back in the 1850s. So, I grew up learning the great American work ethic, working alongside my father, my brothers, my grandfather. I had a lot of extended family in the area. A phenomenal upbringing. I, learned the great American work ethic and learned what it meant to, work with your hands. It was a phenomenal upbringing.
You talked about multi-generational there. You were one generation in a multi-generational structure, for lack of a better word. Did the cohesiveness of being part of that sort of family teach you things that you likely would not have learned or gained otherwise?
Oh, most certainly. I look back on, our nation's experience and the ability to have mentors, the ability to be discipled, working, in an agrarian society alongside your father, with your brothers, as I said, your grandfather. You had the opportunity to have a lot of conversations. You had a lot of opportunity to actually watch. It's not just what I say, but watch how I do, how I conduct my business. And to spend that amount of time day in, day out, every day of the year, aside from when we were at school, working with my family, it taught me a lot about life and about experiences that I would have never have had it was just my father going to work someplace in a 9-to-5 job in an office.
Not surprisingly, you were a football standout in high school. That wasn't your only sport, was it?
No. When you go to a small school, you pretty much have the opportunity, which I think is awesome, to be able to play multiple sports. So I grew up wrestling. I grew up playing baseball. I grew up, in track. So basketball. I played every sport, and I think that helped me, ultimately, as I grew in my athletic prowess to when I ultimately became a Dallas Cowboy, that background of being more of an athlete than a football player helped.
That's an interesting point. In today's world, kids at such a young age seem to get so, I'll say, tunneled into one specific sport as opposed to playing, 3 sports, to your point, 4 or 5 sports. And so do you think that affects the longevity of kids being athletes going forward? Is it good? Is it bad? What are your overall thoughts on that?
It definitely impacts being a single sport. And now with the advent of select sports, where parents pay sometimes a tremendous amount of money for their kids to be able to travel and to play at, certainly at more of an elite level. But what this does, when you specialize in a sport, you're utilizing only certain movements and certain parts of your body, your musculoskeletal system, that it leaves you a preponderance for potential injury. And unlike how I grew up, I played everything. So you're utilizing, holistic body movements. You're not getting pigeonholed into one one sport. So for me, for example, wrestling helped me in my hand-eye coordination. It helped understand leverage, playing baseball, hand-eye coordination, basketball, certainly hand-eye coordination, working on quickness. And that all helped me ultimately for when I picked my sport, football, in college, to excel and to exceed in that area.
So you're an all-state football tight end and a state champion heavyweight wrestler. Did success come easily for you? Did you have any failures along the way?
I laugh at that because I think every athlete that has ever particularly played at a professional level or have had some semblance of success, they have learned more through their failures and their obstacles that they've had to overcome than certainly any successes. I've played with a lot of athletes at an elite professional level where, they relied purely on their athletic talent and it, got them to that level, but it didn't sustain them. At some point in time, as an old coach of mine once said, it only catches up to you when it catches up to you, and it always catches up to you. So for me, I learned more through my inability to overcome and the losses and the aspects of what it took in the weight room and the, running excess sprints or just getting in cardiovascular shape. I learned more about character, integrity, sportsmanship through the struggle. And again, that's, I read a survey the other day or a study the other day that said that people learn more from the journey, the process along the way when you set goals than actually accomplishing the goal itself. So for me, it's all about the journey and it's about the process and it's about living life because that's what life's about.
Colleges sought you out, including your home state universities, Iowa and Iowa State, and offered you full ride scholarships. Why did you choose the Air Force Academy instead? Was it football or desire to serve the country or some combination of the two?
It was all the above. I wanted to play Division I college football. I wasn't highly recruited. I got nibbles from Iowa State, Iowa, for in-state, but I wanted to have an experience that would be unlike going to a traditional institution of higher learning. So I wanted to have that challenge. I wanted to see, quote unquote, if I had the right stuff by going to a college or university that was going to challenge me academically, most certainly challenge me athletically, but also challenge me in regards to who I was as a person, as a leader, as a follower, as a patriot, as a citizen of the United States. And it gave me the opportunity to serve and to have an opportunity to have a job after I graduated. The professional athletics, when I graduated from high school, went into college, was never even on my radar. Certainly was a dream, but I knew that I would have the opportunity to serve my country in some capacity, whether as a pilot or whatever occupation I chose in the Air Force. And that's why I chose to go to the United States Air Force Academy.
What's the process to apply for and be accepted by the Air Force Academy?
It's like every government entity. It's a lot of bureaucracy. You have to go the amount of paperwork that you have to fill out and writing essays. You have to give, make sure you're physically qualified first and foremost too by visiting a doctor for physicals, but most certainly you have to get a nomination through a senator from your state or your local congressman to be able to go. So it's highly competitive. They typically have a primary and then an alternate. They can have as many alternates as they need, but I mean, it's basically you're taking one for sure from every congressional district. So it's a highly competitive process.
We titled this podcast, Excellence Isn't a Destination, It's an Identity. When we spoke a few weeks ago, I love that mindset, which is something that you talk about and something that's on your website. As part of that journey, in order to become better people, we need to become self-aware of who we are. How do we do that without becoming self-absorbed and self-centered so that we truly become our best selves?
One of the one of the quotes I like is, I think Socrates said, wisdom is the knowledge that you don't know everything. And that's where, for me, realizing that living excellence and life, it's not a destination, it's a journey, it's a process. And, along that journey, you have, as we alluded to before, the ups and downs, the pains and joys that come with living that fulfilled life. And in exchange for that, it's a matter of, knowing that you don't know everything, knowing that you've never fully arrived. There's an aspect of humility that comes with that. And the realization that in the mindset of that, it's a growth mindset. It's, I can always improve. I can always get better. I can be a better person. And to achieve that, you have to have some sense of self-awareness, knowing that, hey, the proverbial, my excrement does stink. That when I go out, that I don't have all the answers, and that gives you, can allude to leadership. That same thing is that, as a leader, you have to be willing to listen to others. You have to be willing to take the information, to be able to listen to those under your command, to realize that, to lead them, you have to show that you care first and foremost, and that you're self-aware, that your own shortcomings, your strengths and your weaknesses.
It seems so often the good people have a crisis of confidence. How do we build confidence in ourselves and in the next generation?
Build confidence through resiliency. And you build resiliency through going through life and experiencing failures, experiencing things in life where you've had to struggle, where if everything comes easy for you, there's going to be those times where you are going to be challenged, because everybody's going to be challenged. But how you develop that aspect of confidence in yourself and in your abilities is by knowing that, hey, I've been there before, and that I can work through this, and that I have the skill set and the mental fortitude, the mindset to be able to achieve whatever I want, whatever path in life that I want. But, I have to go through it. As the Army, a lot of my brethren, veterans in the armed forces say, you gotta embrace the suck sometimes. And that's life.
I've heard that statement a few times, so I totally understand and can appreciate that. So how does leadership form us as individuals? Where do we go right and where do we go wrong as leaders and then followers?
How do we form leadership as individuals? I think realizing that first and foremost, that aspect of self-awareness, and realizing, for one, too, that to lead, you have to lead from the front, not from the rear. It's not about just barking orders and giving people directives. It's also setting the example and how you set that example. And that's where character, virtue, integrity comes into play. Those aspects of, am I humble? Am I courageous? Do I have that aspect of commitment, that stick-to-itiveness, all those different, am I truthful? Can people trust me? And that's, to be a leader, you have to have that aspect, as I alluded, self-awareness, but yet realize the communication piece of who are you leading and where are you leading them to? What's your mission? How do we know when we've achieved what we've set out to accomplish? All those aspects are rolled into being a leader. And, everybody is a leader in some capacity, in my opinion, even if it's, I've had teenagers that, for boys, even if it's just making a personal hygiene decision, hour today, that aspect is leadership, taking initiative and stepping out.
I'm laughing because my youngest, our son, he's just turned 11. And so the personal hygiene thing is definitely low on his radar. So I'll tell him, you told him to be a leader and step up and shower and use deodorant. Totally appreciate that. Is leadership something that is innate in certain individuals, or do you think it's something that can be taught?
I think it's both. I think is it the genetic thing, or is it the environment thing? I think that certain people are born with, certain characteristics and traits, personal characteristics and traits. They're just wired that way to be. Leadership may come more natural, but I think at the same token, since life is a journey and it's a process that you can continue to improve, everybody can improve upon their innate abilities that they're blessed with, that they're God-given abilities. So we can all get better. Some, I think, are just probably born or just more innate to be born as leaders.
And how does leadership from the parental level all the way up to the President of the United States shape our culture and our country, especially today as the new code seems to you that everyone gets a participation ribbon and we protect our kids from challenges, failure, and hurt feelings?
I'll just start off as a parent. Our ability, our role, our job as parents is to raise our kids to be fully functional adults. And in life, in adulthood, there are no participation trophies. Our kids have to learn failure. They have to learn, sportsmanship. They have to learn about life. And there was a study that was done, or a book written by a gentleman named Jonathan Haidt, and called The Coddling of the American Mind, where he talked about millennials, which you're referring to, the participation trophy generation. And they said that the one thing that they missed, and the one thing that as parents we should instruct our kids, if you want the most resilient kids, allow them unsupervised play. What that means is to go on when they're out on the playground, to go out and not have a teacher or a parent or a helicopter mom watching over them. If there's a conflict, allow the kids to work it out. Allow them to be able to figure out on their own how to communicate, that it doesn't always resort to violence, or that sometimes how you can use your words to deflate a potential conflict, or how you, on the playground, how you win graciously, how you lose graciously. You learn about life. I think every important lesson that I learned in life, as the saying goes, I learned in kindergarten. It's all the social skills. So what I think it's been our mistake, I'll include myself as we, but I don't include myself in the larger group, but the context of parents, that we have tried to prevent our kids from going through pain and trial and turmoil, when in fact, that is the thing that they need the most in life, is to experience that in our home where it's safe, where you can talk them through. And again, as a parent, that's what I do with my kids, is I would continue to give them increased responsibility. And as far as expectations, and then if something happened, I gave them guardrails, that if they went outside those guardrails where I had to discipline or disciple them, it was like, hey, you realize I told you this is where you needed to operate within these guardrails. You went outside of that, and you realize I told you before, this is going to be the punishment that's affiliated with that. And you need to be held accountable for that. Do you understand? Yes. So that is, you start to treat them and communicate with them that there are consequences in life for action. And I think that's where we need to get back to as parents and in society. And that, what is true at the local level is true at a national level. So when individuals you see in our society today commit crimes, you don't just let them out. I mean, they committed something, and if they're found guilty, they need to be punished for that. There needs to be accountability for that. And when that is thrown out the window, that's why, unfortunately, I think we see a lot of chaos in certain municipalities around our nation, is because there isn't that accountability.
You just said something a minute ago that I thought was very interesting. You said discipline or disciple, and it's the same letters with a few extra. Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I have several tenets that I gave my kids that, I call them proverbs of life. And there was 4 of them that if they got these down, they're good. And one of them is that I said that God disciplines, there's a verse that God disciplines those whom he loves, but discipline is disciple. God disciples. And that's why your mom and I disciple or discipline you. It's a biblical principle. And that's where it, the roots of the 2 words are the same. Discipline, disciple, it's coming under authority of something. And we all operate under authority of something. It's just our choice and our free will to discern which one of those things we fall under.
I love that. I hope you don't mind if I steal that phrase from you.
Hey, have at it. You bet.
So being a leader is more than who can bark orders the loudest. What part do humility and integrity play in leadership?
I alluded to that a little bit before in our conversation, that to me, to be a leader, you have to be humble. Those under your command or under your leadership or under your leadership umbrella have to know that you care. And a part of that is empathy. And a part of that is, again, realizing that I don't have all the answers. We're in this together. And when you bark orders and you kind of lead from behind, I'll say that's not leadership. And people, there's that lack of trust, is because we're out in front, we're doing all this stuff while you're just in the back. You don't have any quote unquote skin in the game. So for leadership, self-awareness, and be humble, and may your yes be yes and your no be no.
I'm a believer in the importance of servant leadership, as it sounds like I think you might be as well. As I was thinking about our conversation last week, it crossed my mind that the military's culture doesn't, or maybe it can't allow much room for servant leadership. Is that a fair assumption? Why or why not?
Um, Military's culture, I think truly that in essence is you do need to be a servant leader. You do need to think of others before yourself. That's the whole premise of the military, is raising your hand, saying that you gave an oath that you're going to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, protecting you against both domestic as well as outside forces that want to do harm to our country. So you're willing to put yourself into harm's way. I was deployed twice for 3 months away from my family in a foreign land because I raised my hand, and I think wanting to support and defend our nation and its interests. And whether you agree with our nation's foreign policy or not, our military is there to be at the whim of our politicians and our diplomats, and to use violence as a last resort if needed. And when you're willing to serve in the military, I think that is the ultimate example of servant leadership, because you're willing to give it all in support of a mission and a purpose to protect others.
Bigger purpose, bigger calling.
Amen.
Your faith is the cornerstone of your life. Is that something that also came from your upbringing? And what does it mean to who you are as a man, a husband, a parent, and other aspects of your life?
I attribute a lot of that to my parents and to my extended family, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. My faith is my identity. And I'll say this: what you do does not define who you are as an individual. I've been asked, when I was a young man, who are you? Or, what do you do? I mean, who are you? And I'll say, I'm Chad Hennings, football player. I'm Chad Hennings, fighter pilot. But I realized that our occupations change, and particularly for this generation, they can change frequently. So that's obviously not who you are. So it's, for me, the identity is that worldview, that filter in which you process all your thoughts, your words, and your experiences through, that provide that meaning, that purpose, and impact. Again, why you do what you do, and that all comes down to your identity. Who are you? And for me, my identity is as a believer in Jesus Christ, as a Christian, and that's the filter that I process everything through that, and that it's through that prism that I find my meaning and find my purpose and the reason why I'm called to do what I do.
You entered the Air Force Flight School in June 1988 and were selected by the Dallas Cowboys in the 1988 NFL Draft. Your commander wouldn't allow you to have any contact with the Cowboys. Do you have any regrets then or later on about serving the Air Force because it prevented you from joining the Cowboys right away?
No, and kind of clarify that a little bit. They didn't allow the media to come in and start asking about when I was going to come play the Cowboys. And to give some context to that, I went through pilot training at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, which is just about an hour and a half outside the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And particularly during the fall of the year, media in Dallas found out that I was just an hour and a half away, and I had been a draft pick, and everybody, Outland Trophy winner. Why aren't you playing for the Cowboys? So I would get these phone calls, and I'm trying to figure out how to fly jets. And my commanders, in their wisdom, discerned that this was, pressure, undue pressure, and a distraction that I didn't need when I'm sitting there trying to figure out, how to be the best pilot that I could be. So, but with that experience, again, for me, it was probably the most important lesson that I learned in my young professional career, was that aspect, what I alluded to before, about identity. Who was I? And for me to be a man of character, I raised my hand and I committed to the Air Force. I'd serve a minimum of 5 years, which was the minimum service academy, but I chose to up that to 8 years because I wanted to fly jets. And I made that commitment prior to being drafted by the Dallas Cowboys and prior to having the success I did on the gridiron at the Air Force Academy. So for me, it was a matter of, okay, put your money where your mouth is. You want to be an individual of character. You want to be an individual of commitment, and that where people can trust you. You got to follow through. And but I say that I knew that in my head, but in my heart, I wanted to compete at the next level. I wanted to see, quote unquote, if I had the right stuff to play professionally and to play for the Dallas Cowboys. So it took me a while to reconcile that. But through that period of time of struggle, again, developing that resiliency of struggling through that aspect of who am I realized a lot about myself and about that life is a choice and that we have choices in life. So choose wisely.
I've read that because of your height, you were only eligible to fly the F-111, F-15 Eagle, or the A-10. What are the similarities and differences between those aircraft, and why'd you ultimately choose the A-10?
Well, I didn't get a choice as to what I got. You received your pilot training assignment. Once you finish pilot training, they give you basically what jet you're going to fly. But the difference between those jets were like night and day. The F-111 was a low-level interdiction, go supersonic at 100 feet above the ground, potentially deliver nukes, deep within, Soviet territory. F-15 was an air superiority fighter aircraft. Think Top Gun, dogfighting up in the air. And the A-10, which for me was the plane that I flew, was the best defensive lineman's dream. You fly low, it was slow, but it packed a mean punch. It was like getting into a knife fight with tanks on the ground. And that mission, I'm thankful, and again, by the wisdom of the instructor pilots that I had, that's the assignment that I received because it just fit me, who I was from a personality standpoint, so well. And the mission was fun. I could fly over, I was based out of the UK in England. We'd forward deploy to Germany once, if not twice a month. And during those times, we could fly back in the day anywhere in Germany at 500 feet. And there are certain areas we could go down to 100 feet. And just to be able to experience that, to fly the way we did, it set me up for success. And how I approached different problems and obstacles in life was through those experiences I had of flying.
Chad, we were talking before the break about your deployments in the Persian Gulf. In 1991, because the military was reducing its budgets, you were released from the remainder of your Air Force commitment, and that freed you to join the Dallas Cowboys. How'd your military service prepare you in terms of resilience and the ability to adapt for this suddenly entirely different life?
Everything. I mean, everything. People ask, been asked that question, what were the similarities between the two? And I said it's been a lot of similarities between being in a fighter squadron and being in a locker room. It prepared me from a physical aspect. Being deployed as I was for 6 months, when you're flying those missions, you're away from family and friends, you're in a quote unquote combat zone, and all there is to do is, when you're not flying, you work out, you have a few beers, you eat a lot of carbohydrates, and you bulk up. And I was able to do that. But then from a mental aspect, here I was 4 years later. I've flown 45 missions, in northern Iraq in support of Operation Provide Comfort. I had flown, I had 600 plus hours in a jet over a 2-year period. So I got to fly quite a bit. And in those experiences that I had, I matured. I went from a college, athlete, student, and then 4 years later, I'm a vested combat veteran, and with a maturity level, I had been in some high intense situations and have been tested for that aspect of resiliency and commitment and et cetera. So for me, and then just let alone planning the missions. When you would fly as a flight lead, I'd walk through, this is a weather into target area. These are the areas that our mission, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And this is if something bad happens to us, how are we going to communicate between my wingman and myself? How am I going to communicate to my superiors to get further insight? How are we going to make different adjustments? And a lot of times that we would go into a target area, you would brief a specific mission, and you get there and the whole tactical situation has changed. So now we have to adapt. And we always said that flexibility is the key to air power. And then when I transitioned to the Cowboys, it was pretty much the same thing from a physical perspective. I was used to that high intensity working out. I was used to that rotation of, kind of putting it out there, living somewhat on the edge, then the preparation, when you go for practice or game time, you have certain goals you want to accomplish or a certain game plan you want to go out there. And then at halftime, you have to be able to make certain adjustments because the whole situation or the opposing team's offense, they added some new wrinkles. And how are we going to adapt? I'm on the line, how I'm communicating with my fellow defensive linemen were similar to how I'm communicating either through hand signals or through just different code words or whatnot, how we're communicating with one another, to accomplish our mission. So that was it. Both entities were very focused, very driven, and the similarities between the two, I could go on for quite a while on talking about those, but the hardest transition for me was just the weather. I go from not sweating hardly in Europe, where it's 78 degrees in the summertime, to now going through training camp in Austin, Texas, where it's 98 degrees and 60% humidity. That was the biggest adjustment for me.
Hottest weather I've ever experienced was Dallas in August, so I can totally understand that. And I wasn't wearing, shoulder pads or a helmet.
Yeah, that's what I always laugh and tell people that God did not mean for man to play football in Texas in July. But that's
tell Mr. Jones that.
Yeah, well, now they go out to Oxnard, right? They get the cool ocean breeze off of being in California. They have indoor practice facilities, so we got screwed.
You were older than the typical rookie when you joined the team. Rookies can be treated kind of badly. Did you get the, air quote, rookie treatment, or were you treated with a bit more respect considering you're coming from the cockpit of a fighter jet?
No, my relationships were totally different because I, quote unquote, laugh at the guys that I had a real job before I came here. And I was at 26, turned 27 my rookie year, and I'm 4, potentially 5, maybe even 6 years older than a lot of the other rookies there. And, the guys in my draft class, I had Michael Irvin, Ken Norton Jr. were in my draft class, and these guys are now in their 4th or going in their 5th season. They're vested veterans. And for me, the thing that I always talk about to the individuals is that there is a commonality, a similarity between the two entities, as I alluded before, but there's an intrigue. Everybody in that locker room cared less about what I did, my senior year, the stats and accolades that I had, but they wanted to know what it was like to fly jets. What was it like to kind of put it out there, to quote unquote, put yourself into harm's way? And I make that same distinction that I talk to a lot of my, fellow veterans or active duty guys, and they're as intrigued about, hey, what was it like to be in the locker room with the Cowboys? How do you do this? So there's that mutual respect and intrigue. And for me, I was, I walked in at, people, I was kind of an anomaly, and people wanted to know, those other experiences. So I didn't get the typical rookie treatment.
You mentioned a moment ago, you were 26 when you joined, but then you had a 9-year career. That's a long time in the NFL to begin with. And you were a defensive end, which obviously is extremely physical. I think that's really just an incredible testament to you, your ability, and your durability. We're going to talk shortly about your faith and how you've stayed strong in spirit. How do you remain strong of body? And do you feel the physical effects of the NFL today?
Well, the latter part of physical effects, I think for any time that you've played the game, and everybody has arthritis. I've got arthritic, every joint in my body is arthritic. And it's coming to that point in my life as I'm in my late 50s. I have a lot of former teammates that, knee replacements, hip replacements, shoulder replacements, spinal fusions. It goes on and on and on. But I was very fortunate that I think I had good genes. Growing up on a farm and being that good German stock person that was created, to run into things. Literally, I've got arthritis, but for me, it's an active part of that. If you don't use it, you lose it. That I have to stay active, and I, exercise. I don't go in the weight room and try to squat or bench press the whole place. It's just being smart about how you go about doing your business. And for me, my quality of life, I feel great. I'm in great shape. And so playing that length of time, I was very fortunate and blessed, but you got to be smart about how you do it. And while I was with the Cowboys too, I took real great care of myself. And that was part of my workout ethic and my diet and different modalities of treatment that I went through, from chiropractic to massage to ice baths, et cetera, that allowed my body to recover.
For our listeners, I highly encourage you to watch the video on YouTube because Chad looks like he could suit up for the Cowboys today, and they might call you up this year. We'll see what happens. So,
And,
who were some of the favorite people you played with or who coached you, and what qualities did they possess that caused you to like them?
one guy that I'll give props to that we butted heads while we played together, but he was a phenomenal football player, both physically as well as football intellect wise, was Charles Haley. Charles had the reputation back in the day. Well, he was undiagnosed bipolar when he was going through. So you never knew what Charles was going to show up in the locker room, or on the practice field or in the game field that day. But this was a guy who put it out there. He had tremendous work ethic, and his IQ of breaking down offenses and understanding what everybody on the defense was doing was second to none. And he was a little rough around the edges from a motivational standpoint, but he was a guy that a lot of us looked up to, really, and he was the leader of our group because he had the gravitas, he had the ethos and the pathos to want to go out there and do it. Other players, that I admired, of course, Troy Aikman, you got Michael and Emmett and all the other Hall of Famers, Larry Allen, the guys that I played with, Deion Sanders, are one of the best athletes, pure athletes that I've ever been affiliated with. But from coaching standpoint, I was drafted by Tom Landry, didn't get to play for Tom, but played for Jimmy Johnson, Barry Switzer, Chan Gailey, and Dave Campbell. I essentially you could equate, I had 5 head coaches in a 9-year career, 4 for sure. So for those of you who are listening from a corporate standpoint, that's like having 4 different president CEOs every couple of years, during that span. So we were very fortunate to have had the success that we did just because of that turnover. But that's a testament to the guys in that team, the cohesiveness, particularly in those early years, that everybody knew their role. I've never been around a group of more selfless individuals than when I was around those guys. They wanted to win, not just win, but win Super Bowls. And it was, looking back now, 30 whatever years later, it was a very unique experience.
I never thought about how many different head coaches there were during your tenure. And you make a great point that in any organization you're with, whether it be professional sports, business, et cetera, that much change in leadership in that short of a period of time, it's a true testament to your team because we all know everyone's got different leadership styles and who their favorite executives are going to be underneath them, or who their favorite players are going to be. And so for you as a team, that cohesiveness, as you mentioned, is just phenomenal, which obviously attributes, tremendously to the success of your franchise then.
Amen.
And, you and I mentioned last week when we spoke, we had Charles Haley on about a year and a half ago. And I encourage our listeners to go and watch that show because it's quite entertaining and a little bit of a different conversation than Chad and I are having today. But again, I encourage you to look that show up. And is there anybody in the field that you just couldn't stand and you really wanted to beat them every time you played against them?
That was, of course, the ultimate trigger answer there is the Philadelphia Eagles. Just rivalry that we had. But back in the day, we had not only the Eagles, but it was the 49ers that we competed against year after year, particularly in the early 90s, was who was going to win the NFC championship. And then it was the Green Bay Packers were a big rival. Again, who was going to win the NFC championship to get to the Super Bowl. But, of all those teams, I would say just because particularly when you played them at their stadium, at Old Vet Stadium in Philly, that was a tough place to play. Their fans, they're legit. Props to your fans. They're crazy. And that stadium was a tough place to play. And, but, if I had to go with one, I'd definitely pull the trigger with the Eagles.
My last football question, and we'll move on. 3 Super Bowl championships. What was your most memorable moment as a Dallas Cowboy?
People ask which one game. It's kind of like asking me which one of my kids I love more, right? That they were all unique in themselves. But the game that was probably the most memorable for me was the last one, Super Bowl 30 against the Steelers. I was fortunate enough to have a couple sacks in that game and just had a good game of rushing the passer, putting pressure on Neil O'Donnell. And he's Larry Brown, who is the MVP, who is our cornerback. in the game. He had 2 picks. And I said, you got those picks because we made Neil O'Donnell throw off his back foot and he was throwing on the run. And, we made you, so we should get the co-MVP. But if I had to choose one game, it would probably been Super Bowl 30.
Tell us about Wingmen Ministries.
Wingmen, I've alluded to in our conversation some of the aspects of issues that, we have particularly as men in life, of just struggling with performance, of struggling with who you are, identity, of struggling with when things don't necessarily go the way you want them to go or the way you need them to go. Who do you turn to? Do you have those relationships in life where you can be totally transparent? And I didn't. It's very difficult. In all transparency, my son, when I was playing for the Cowboys, acquired an autoimmune illness, and right after the third Super Bowl 30. And it's not like you can walk into a locker room and just lay it out on guys and say, hey guys, I'm not holding it together today. My son's struggling. I don't know what to do. And you have to perform at a high level. So that struggle in my life encouraged me to form a men's ministry called Wingmen, where it's men forming those discipleship, Christ-centered, faith-based masculine relationships where we get into small groups and we hold each other accountable. There's that aspect of accountability, of trust, etc. And it's all from a biblical perspective. But, we as men, just with the whole things that we deal with in our culture today of toxic masculinity, about what does it mean to be a man, particularly with young men today, they struggle, and fatherlessness too, of young men growing up without dads, that they're literally like a rudderless ship at times. And it's to come alongside them and to walk through life with them and to, just talk through different things with them from a faith-based perspective. It adds meaning and it adds context and it adds purpose to their lives.
You just talked about young boys and young men needing that male role model. Would you say that male role model is the same or just as important for girls?
Oh, I think so too. For my daughter, it's for, they always talk about young ladies wanting to marry a man just like dear old dad. And I think for kids in particular, it takes 2 parents to raise a family. It takes a mother and a father. And what they get from their fathers is an aspect of identity, of that character, integrity, and purpose. They get typically from moms, they get the aspect of empathy and care and nurturing. And for me, that's what I tried to give to both my kids. I have both a boy and a girl, a daughter and a son. And I wanted my daughter to realize who her father is and how much I love and I care for her, so that she's not going to want, as she got to the age as a teenager and stuff, that she's not going to run away in the arms of some young man, and realize who she is first and foremost. And that's where she got that from me and from her mother, that aspect of purpose and identity.
You're a huge proponent for coaches and kids being involved in team sports and activities. Even though you had a stable home life, how do coaches impact your development? And how do coaches make a difference for kids whose home life isn't the idyllic picture of mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, etc.?
For me, coaches are the last, potentially the last level that can prevent kids from going, quote unquote, into the system. I mean, coaches are so essential because they can be that role model, that father figure for male coaches to their athletes. And coaches, for me, my high school coaches had the biggest impact outside of my parents in my life. My high school football coach changed the trajectory of my life. Quick story, to my senior year of high school, my coach sat me down and asked me what I wanted to do after graduation. I said, my goal is I want to play Division I college football someplace. I wasn't highly recruited at this point in time, but I got a letter, shows how long ago, a letter, not an email, not electronic communication, but a letter from the Air Force Academy saying, hey, I think, we're interested in you if you qualify and if you can get a nomination to come here. And I told him that, and he took it upon himself that summer to put together a highlight reel, a 16 millimeter highlight reel, drive the 900 miles from our hometown area in Eastern Iowa to Colorado Springs to the Air Force Academy to hand deliver this film to the coaches there and to say, you need to take a look at this kid. He's something that could contribute to your program, and he's the type of kid that you want. And that's how I got on their radar to recruit me and to bring me in. My coach cared about me. I can't say enough about my wrestling coach, Jerry Erickson, my high school football coach, Reese Morgan, and Daryl Schumacher. These guys, I wanted to be like them when I grew up. And that aspect of role modeling, and it wasn't just what they said, it's how they conducted themselves. And that's why coaches today are so important, because a lot of, unfortunately, young people don't have a mother and a father in a home.
Amen. Two books that you mentioned to me earlier in our conversation last week, The Boy Crisis by Warren Farrell and John Gray, and Carol Dweck's book, Mindset. They're two very different books with very different topics, but take them one at a time. Why do you recommend those books for other people?
For me, mindset particular, I alluded this in our conversation, that mindset, she breaks it down that there's basically two types of people. There's a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Those people, the fixed mindset is, hey, I'm as good as I can be. I'm not going to get any better. And, that's just life. The growth mindset is, hey, I know that I have certain strengths and talents, but I can improve upon things. I can think outside the box and how I can continue to improve on a skill set. Maybe I'm not the best piano player. I'm not given that innate ability to do that, but I can work on it still and get better. And for me as a parent, what I took from the book was how I communicate with my kids. For example, they talk about, if you sit there and you tell your child, oh, you're the smartest kid in your class, you're the most beautiful kid, you're the best athlete, you're the best baseball player, football player, oh, you're so strong, whatever. And they come across other kids in their relationships or at school, whatever, that there may be a prettier little girl, or there may be a better athlete, or there may be somebody smarter than them. And it's kind of like, well, that doesn't matter. Person with fixed mindset, I'm done. I can't compete. I'm not there. Versus those with a growth mindset, how you communicate is, I really appreciate how hard you worked to get that A on that test. Or I really appreciate how hard you're working to improve your baseball skills, your football skills, or whatever. Different mindset with that, but it encourages the work ethic. It encourages them to get out and to be whatever they want to be. But it's aspect of, it's a choice. It's, do I choose to work that way? And the boy crisis, what hit me on that was from a father standpoint. They talked about epigenetics, which in there that when there's not a father in the household, that the telomeres, which are an indication of how long of a life the individual is going to live, no father in the household, the telomeres are shortened, meaning that if you don't have a dad, a two-parent household, if you don't have a father in there, there's not just emotional ramifications and consequences, but there's also physical, because you're living a shorter period of life. I don't agree with a lot of the conclusions that they came to in the book, but the data that they had as to why there's a boy crisis today in our culture and why young men are getting beat upon, it's a worthwhile read in that case.
And sticking with books, you've written 3, count them, 1, 2, 3 books. Very impressive in its own right, besides your football career. First book, Forces of Character. Next one, It Takes Commitment. And then Rules of Engagement. Could you share a brief synopsis of each book and how people in our audience can find them?
Sure. You can find them all on my website, chadhennings.com. And Amazon for the latter two. The first one was It Takes Commitment. I wrote that book. It's kind of a biographical book published through Multnomah when I was playing for the Cowboys. And that book was kind of a thing about the concept of commitment, how I try to exemplify commitment in my life. Rules of Engagement, Finding Faith and Purpose in a Disconnected World. That book was written because I wanted to talk to men about kind of the Wingmen model, why life is a choice, how break it down to 2 segments, basic training and then active duty, the importance of relationships, how money, mindset, all these different things, integrity, character, purpose. And then the last book, Forces of Character, I wanted to show that, again, character was ubiquitous. That's a choice. So I chose to sit down and have conversations with 10 people, some names you'd recognize: Roger Staubach, Troy Aikman, Jason Garrett, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, interviewed an astronaut, former human rights attorney from communist Romania, survivor of Auschwitz, a CEO from the National Center on Fathering, and a homelessness expert. All, male, female, up and down the scale of different life experiences. I wanted to show that, again, character is a choice, that it's a model, and every individual's story that's in there, it's amazing the similarities that they've had. They came from all different experience levels, but they chose to be an individual character.
And again, that website is chadhennings.com. We have just a few minutes left. I'll turn the microphone over to you to take us to close. What's the most important message you'd like to leave with our audience today?
Thank you, Chris, first of all, for having me on. I would just say that as you're listening to me, what I hope resonates is that aspect of identity first and foremost. What you do does not define who you are. You need to come to terms with that aspect and to ponder that. Who are you as an individual? Because everybody puts something in front of them, whether that's their faith, whether that's, the environment, whether that's politics, whether that's, some economic model. We all, as Pascal said, inside man is a God-sized vacuum that only God can fill, that we try to fill our purpose and who we are with a variety of different things. And that's where I just want to encourage people, sit down and contemplate that, because in life, until you get that foundational principle decided upon, the decisions you make will be made in a vacuum, depending upon your emotional status, depending upon whatever the economy is doing, the health, or sometimes it may mean short-term gain, long-term pain. But who you are, your identity doesn't change. It is set in stone. It's set in concrete.
Chad Hennings, thank you so much for being with us today.
Appreciate it.
How about them Cowboys?
Amen.
And thanks to our audience for joining. We're out of time. I'm Chris Meek. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.